Hey everyone, good evening to everyone who is joining us from India. Good afternoon to all our Middle Eastern, European, African folks, and good morning to everyone joining from the West. We are live right now, and I can see many of you all have started streaming in on our YouTube channel. And for all those who have dialed in on this call, if you could let us know in the chat, which city are you exactly dialing in from? Which city are you exactly dialing in from? If you can just put that up on the chat. To everyone who has joined in right now. If you can put in the chat box as to which city are you dialing in from exactly. We have students joining in from Solapur, Maharashtra, students from Kolkata, from West Bengal, from Bhubaneswar, Tirupati, Noida, Delhi NCR, Kashmir, India, Meerut, India, Vadodara, Bhopal, Nagpur, Khandwa, Noida, Delhi, Aligarh, and from across the lengths and breadths of India, students have joined in today. That's quite wonderful. All right. With that, quickly introducing myself, I'm Moin Naik and I'm representing Seed Global Education today. We are a higher education firm based out in the United Kingdom, and we help high potential students in making their dreams of either studying a MBA, a business master's, or STEM masters in top global universities a reality. And today, for the next 1 hour, we would be discussing about the future of cyber physical systems, about the innovation, challenges, and opportunities with Professor Renato Mancuso. And this session today is brought to you by Boston University, their Graduate College of Arts and Sciences. Located in one of the most renowned educational cities in the world, Boston University's College of Arts and Sciences is a cornerstone of academic excellence, driving innovation across a wide range of fields. As the largest school within Boston University, CAS offers an expansive curriculum that nurtures intellectual curiosity, encourages interdisciplinary collaboration, and challenges students to think beyond traditional boundaries. With a robust alumni network of over 3 lakh professionals living and leading in more than 180 plus countries, CAS is deeply connected to global progress. Boston University's reputation is reinforced by its 22 ranking globally on the Times Higher Education Global University Employability Ranking 2024. All right. Before we begin with this session, I have a quick poll for all the students who have joined for this session. I would be launching the poll right now, and we would be waiting for 10 seconds for all your answers to come in. And here is the poll on your screens. As everyone would have gone to the topic which we are discussing today, how do you think can we improve system timings? Do you think with the use of smarter resource management, we can do that? Or by upgrading to faster computers, faster systems, ignoring the timing issues altogether, or by running as many programs as possible? What do you think is the answer via which we can improve the system timings? We would be waiting for another 7 seconds. Many of you all have put in your answers. Last 5 seconds. All right, here we go. Okay, so about 84% of you all think that using smarter softwares and better resource management helps us with improving system timings. That's quite wonderful. Okay, so without any further ado, introducing the speakers for today, we are joined by Professor Renato Mancuso. He's the Associate Professor in the Computer Science Department and the Director of the Cyber Physical Systems Lab at the Boston University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. He also covers the role of Cyber Physical Systems Lab, and before joining BU in 2017, Professor Mancuso received his PhD from the Department of Computer Science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He's particularly interested in high-performance cyber-physical systems, focusing on techniques to achieve controllable timeliness for safety-critical applications in complex accelerator-enabled embedded systems. With his research group at BU, he has pioneered software-hardware techniques to perform fine-grained performance profiling and management with a specific focus on practical approaches that can be used in emerging hybrid platforms. Thank you so much, Professor Mancuso, for joining us today.
Of course, it's an honor to be here, and I want to welcome all our guests, as well as thank you very much, Moin and Mark, for having me here. And last thank is for the amazing introduction. Yeah.
Yep. Also, we have with us Mr. Mark Khan, Director of Masters Marketing and Enrollment at Boston University Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, a role which he has held since 2022. With nearly years of experience, Mark oversees marketing strategies and enrollment initiatives for master's programs, helping to drive student recruitment and engagement. Based in Boston, Massachusetts, he ensures that the university's program attracts top talents like all the students who have joined us today. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks, Mon.
With this, I now hand over the floor to Professor Mancuso for the masterclass.
All right, let's get started. Go ahead and share my screen. Can you confirm that you can see my screen? Should be just a black screen for now.
We see a black screen.
Fantastic. Let's start. All right, folks. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. And I'm glad to see that many of you already have the right intuition from the poll that, yeah, indeed, smart resource management is going to be a key technique to be able to enforce timeliness in our system. So the first thing I want to do is apologize to all the wannabe time traveler in this talk, because we are now going to talk about how to go back in time or visit the future. Instead, we're going to talk about how do we control this evanescent dimension, which is timeliness in our safety critical systems. And so just to give proper credit before I dive into the meat of things, I am the director of the CPS lab, the Cyber Physical Systems Lab at BU, which is now comprised of many talents that have enabled all the research I'm going to touch on briefly in these 30 minutes together. But these are some pictures of my students going from postdocs, as well as PhD students, as well as master students, and counting much more that are gravitating around my lab, as well as I have to give thanks to all the sponsors, industry, NSF, that have supported my research, and they continue to support the work. So, cyber physical systems, all right? What are cyber physical systems? Well, it's easy to speak about examples. Cyber physical systems are essentially computers that interact with the real world. And this includes things like self-driving cars that are really computers on wheels, UAVs that are unmanned aerial vehicles, so things that fly without the intervention of humans for the most part. Industry 4.0, so smart manufacturing, as well as things like commercial space flights, right? Talk about rovers that are deployed on faraway planets. And all of these are just examples, but really cyber physical systems applies, the definition of cyber physical systems apply to all those systems that essentially need to sense the physical world, compute something often non-trivial about the environment around them, and then communicate, interact with other systems in the field and with humans as well, and finally actuate or shape, change the very physical system in which they operate in. All right, so this is nice, and the question is now why timeless is important, and in fact not just important, is absolutely fundamental. Well, because let's consider a very simple cyber physical system, not even a fancy one that needs vision or complex sensor information. Let's just consider a car. And if you drive a car, I hope your car is equipped with something called an ACU, an airbag control unit. And the job of the airbag control unit is to, well, deploy the airbag when needed. And the way it does this job is by periodically, right, at regular time interval, notice this little up arrow, sense the world around it. And by this, it really means sense accelerators, pressure, direction of forces involved in the cabin. And every time this little computation is triggered, the job that this unit has to do is a combination of sensing, sensor fusion, so computation on figuring out if it's really a crash or not, and if a crash is detected, well, actuation, so deploy the airbag. And importantly, if a crash is not detected, do not deploy the airbag. So if everything works correctly and by a certain deadline, so in a certain time frame, here's what happens. If you do have a crash, the computation is completed on time, and as you're flying toward the steering wheel, the airbag deploys and catches you on flight. Of course, if there's any problem with the timeliness of the system, which is the ability to complete this computation on time and so overrun the deadline, the behavior of the system is very different and you can predict what's going to happen. So you start flying toward the steering wheel and you will impact it. And worse yet, the airbag can explode on your face. And so that's double damage in my language. So I hope I convince you at the very intuitive level right now that timeliness is a fundamental dimension. You cannot just not design for it and then worry later or ignore it altogether. Otherwise, your word processor will work just fine. Your self-driving car is going to be a safety hazard. And in fact, right, what are the challenges? Why are we even worried about this, right? We have built airplanes for a while. We've built cars for a while. Why do we worry about timeliness now in new cyber-physical system, in modern cyber-physical system? Well, because it used to be the case that your cyber-physical systems were built in the following way. You had little functional units, hundreds of them sometimes in a modern car, all spread around the vehicle, and all of them were in charge of different micro tasks. But now what's happening is we need much more consolidation of feature. We need to have a bunch of cameras being able to understand the surrounding world to actuate what the car is doing. And so there's a push to integrate everything, a lot of these micro functionalities into smaller systems. And these systems not only have to do all the work that we were doing before, for example, lane keeping assistance, right? But also really take on new duties which are much more daunting in terms of heaviness. So for example, communicate with other vehicles, read high bandwidth inputs, as I said, multiple cameras, maybe LiDARs, and then perform diagnostic and control, as well as actuate very complex subsystems. So you go from one throttle, one brake, to having, for example, thrust vectoring on four-wheel motors in a modern electric vehicle, for instance. And so all of this, right, leads to a problem with timeliness, because when you start to integrate functionality into the same platform, here I'm considering a state-of-the-art server-grade Intel machine. Here's what happens. Your performance of that same application will start to drop. And you may say, okay, but how much? Because it's just 10%, we just account for it and call it a day. Well, here's a plot, right? So on the x-axis, I will start turning on additional cores on which we have heavy memory intensive, imagine machine learning, vision tasks, right? And then I'm going to keep on the y-axis that we see that little dot up there. That's going to be the performance of the application under analysis when it's alone in the platform, okay? So for now, for example, it's able to extract around 8 GB per second. So I'm using bandwidth as a metric of performance here. So as we activate more cores, we can observe a sharp drop in the performance of the application under analysis. Here it goes below 1 GB per second, right? And this depends a lot on what the other applications are doing. So here I'm considering writes versus reads into memory, write mostly, read mostly workload. But regardless, the drop in performance is significant. And you can see now how an application can go from meeting its deadline to completely missing and causing a lot of control issues. All right, so so then what are we playing with here, right? Really, we are playing with randomness normally. If we take the execution time, so how long it takes for an application to go from start to end, this is not a constant, right? This is actually a random variable. So we can plot on the x-axis how long something takes to execute, and then on the y-axis, the probability of that runtime to occur. And what you will see is some shape of a distribution. This is a probability distribution, essentially. Again, this is a known variable just because of the huge amount of complexity that is our system that makes this like a chaotic system if you don't manage it, right? So we can set some boundaries. We can say, okay, well, the execution time is going to be somewhere between the best case, somewhere in the middle, we are going to have the center of mass of this distribution, so average worst execution time. And then we're going to have also a worst case execution time, which is what we really care about in a system that is safety critical. And so with this, right, how do we express this then timeliness? Well, timeliness becomes a constraint on the probability that our execution time stays below a certain threshold. We call it T, right? And then it depends on how we pick this alpha, which is kind of like our paranoia level, if you want, right? If we want to be absolutely sure that 100% of the time we're going to stay below the deadline, we're going to pick alpha equal to 0. That's a worst case execution time constraint. But in cloud systems, sometimes people like to say, well, we just want to keep a certain constraint on the tail latency. There is no difference between the two propositions. It's just a matter of what's your paranoia level, right? So my research tries to really address how to do things in both domains. But, this is just an intuitive idea why timeliness is important. So let's dig into some relatively recent news and see why, if it's violated, you can see already that we're going to have a huge societal cost. So I remember this article from The Independent a few years ago now, or maybe a year ago, where there was a Tesla being tested on on being able to stop for a kid-sized mannequin placed on the road, and consistently the Tesla car were unable to stop on time, and it would just drive over this mannequin, right? And you could say, well, I mean, this doesn't sound like a timing problem. It could be anything. It could be a problem with object detection. Although other cars of similar brand with similar feature were able to get this done correctly. And so you can still speculate whether timing is the issue until a certain CEO comes online and says, hey, you remember that problem? We'll actually work on things so that we can reduce latency from sensing to actuation, in this case brake actuation, by 10, 20%, whatever that means, right? But you can see that this was inherently a timeless violation problem. All right, so how do we go from being unable to control timeliness in complex systems to actually put things under control? So dominating complexity, really, how do we dominate the huge complexity of modern cyber-physical systems? Well, typically in computer science, what we do is, well, we like to forget about all the teeny little details that are underneath in the platform, right? And so we take the hardware and we abstract it away into something that is easier to reason about or program. For example, you don't reason about the assembly anymore, you reason in Python, for example. And then we do this over and over again, right? We don't want to work on Python because maybe it requires still learning the language, so we work on kind of block design programming style, right? These days, we don't even do that. We just ask ChatGPT to write the code for us and call it a day, right? So that's essentially another example of abstracting away things. But the problem is when you do that, you lose two levels of control on your system. One, you have no clue, you start to have no clue what is the temporal behavior of your system. And two, you start to lose track of how secure your system is, how confident you are that your system is secure. So my research requires to forget about all these beautiful abstraction layers and really pierce through the layers and understand how the platform behaves under the hood, perhaps observe it directly so that then we can export provable guarantees at the level of timing and also security. But I won't get into security in this talk, but just so you know that there's a deep connection between timing and security. All right, so why are we doing this? When I say complexity, what do I mean? Well, I mean systems that are really, really sophisticated, and this is not stopping, it's just increasing exponentially. For example, we have systems where you have on-chip image processing, so you have embedded GPUs, TPUs, sensor cores, right? As well as systems where you have some pre-consolidated cores as well as reprogrammable hardware. So this is hardware for which you can decide what kind of engine you want to implement at runtime, right? So I'm not talking about programming it, but really defining the hardware on it. We'll see more about this. So all of this is happening. At the same time, our operating systems, our hypervisors are ancient. So our operating system has not evolved. The way we designed them has not significantly evolved to account for these huge complexity spikes. As a matter of fact, right, if we take perhaps one of the most expensive programs in the US, the F-35, this is a program that has gone something like 55.1 billion over budget. And I can only speculate that the reason was time integration problems, but really, I know that when working on the system, not having systematic ways to handle timeliness leads to integration nightmares. All right, so where is the temporal interference coming from? Where does the issue with deploying an application alone and then adding more application on other cores leads to a degradation in performance? Well, in traditional systems, where we didn't even have this heterogeneity, we have a bunch of cores that are operating parallel. But the problem is that when they start to access memory resources, they will access a shared cache. They will access typically a memory controller that is also shared, and a DRAM subsystem, main memory subsystem, which is also shared. That's where the interplay in timing between applications that are completely parallel on different cores shows up. And this was already a problem when I started my PhD back in 2012. These days, we are dealing with systems that have not only heterogeneous subsystems for memory, for example, multiple memory controller, non-volatile memory, NVM, or maybe scratchpad memory. So now you have a huge swath of resources that you have to be aware and be able to manage, because if all your applications are suddenly targeting the same controller, there's not going to be enough bandwidth to be able to run everything in a timely manner. And so we have the shared heterogeneous memory subsystem that needs to be managed, as well as big bandwidth consumers, like big memory consumers like GPU, as well as maybe FPGA, so programmable hardware where you can have, DLAs, deep learning accelerators. And all of this needs to be kept coherent by a cache coherent interconnect, which now all of a sudden becomes this very fundamental piece in the middle of the system where is handling coordination globally. So systems are more complex, and the sources of interference in time are really being exacerbated by this heterogeneity and this heightened activity of the system. Right, so where are we now in tackling this problem? And my argument is that we cannot tackle this problem without substantial management, right? And here I'm going to go one notch above management and call it self-awareness. Platforms need to be aware of what's running on them, what the workload is trying to achieve, and therefore what resources need to use, and also how those resource degradation curves looks like ahead of time, so we can take proactive management actions. Right, so currently, typical operating system, I joke with my students, they use, I'm being semi-serious here, a goldfish computing model, which is they take a blob of binary application, run it, put it on the system into execution, execute, forget that ever happened, so collect no data about the interaction between platform and software, and then rinse and repeat forever, potentially thousands of times per second, right? So this is what I call goldfish computing. So instead, we want to go all the way to the right, where we want to try and manage our platforms in a way that is meaningful and informed. All right, so here I'm going to quickly touch on some kind of key milestone that in my group we worked on and we continue to work on, right? So the first one is the idea that, well, originally we started from saying an operating system needs to at the very least, be able to partition resources between applications, cores, accelerators. And so what we call SCE is a single core equivalent machine, where you slice a piece of your machine and you know that you can assign a certain set of resources to your application. This one has evolved throughout my journey at BU, where we have kind of realized that we can actually replace the entire OS with just techniques at the partitioning hypervisor. So we can write a very thin layer of partitioning hypervisor, where we can embed all these partitioning strategies. And that also frees the upper level from, for example, being able to deploy, instead of a full OS, maybe some unikernel or some RTOSs, right, in your criticality domains. For example, highly critical domains, very good, very deterministic OS, as opposed to a full-blown out Linux in your low criticality domain. And you can co-host things on the same machine, keeping resources partitioned. So we actually work on one such solution, right? So we work on something called JLAUS RT. And this was tailored to ARM64 machines, like the ones you have in your smartphone these days. And we are able to implement techniques like cache partitioning via coloring, memory bandwidth partitioning for CPUs, memory bandwidth partitioning for accelerators too. And also we tested how this could integrate with Linux turned into a unikernel. And this work was done in collaboration with Red Hat, which is one of our partners for this kind of research, system level research work. So this was just the one step, but we showed that resource partitioning is important, in fact, fundamental, and we are able to do it, but it's really just one little step in the right direction. So hardware partitioning is needed and should be a commodity, but it's just not enough, right? So instead, how do we gather knowledge of what the applications are doing? And here's at a very high level a problem proposition. So normally you have your applications, and the application use memory, things like data, text, heap, stack, right? Now, normally an operating system will just say, well, this is normal cacheable memory. I will throw it in whatever page I can allocate from my heterogeneous memory subsystem. This is not great because we lose knowledge of what resources are being utilized. Instead, what we say needs to be done is export knowledge of the heterogeneity in the memory subsystem, and then marry, right, knowledge of what's important, what pages are more important in my application process space, and be able to drive allocation to a different zone in a way that is aware of the temporal impact of using a piece of memory rather than another. And so to do this, however, we want to reason black box. We don't want to work on the source code. We want to be able to do this by just taking a binary from somewhere that needs to run and do this entirely at the system level. So without complex compiler level techniques that would need to recompile the software, right? So here I'm just going to mention, I'm not going to have the time to present them, but we have methods to, for example, understand the interaction between the application and the cache, or for example, to reason on the temporal impact of each individual page allocation on the overall runtime of the software under analysis. And by doing this, we start to make another step in the right direction, which is now we can partition resource and also learn what our application wants to do on the platform, right? But it's still not enough. So again, this is needed, but it's just another step in the right direction. So what else can we do? Well, here's an idea, right? We can start to merge our knowledge of what application needs to do to their degradation characteristics. What I mean by that is, let's say that we're able to isolate, focus on one core, the red core, the real-time core, while other cores are just running some application that we care less about in terms of timeliness. So now we want to focus on one core running the really critical stuff in our system. Now what we can do with these profiling techniques, we can really observe a fundamental dimension, which is how long does it take for this application to access memory? So the memory latency, right? And that's also at the fundamental level. This happens millions of times per second, if not trillions of times per second at this computation scale. This will give you a random variable, which is the distribution of transaction latencies. And when you're alone, solo, when you're the only one on the platform, you will see a certain distribution. But when the other cores start to become active, you will notice interference as a shift in this distribution. So what we can do, if we are able to see things and control things at that level, we can dictate a reference distribution that we want to be maintained throughout the execution of the software for each individual memory transaction. And by doing that, what we're able to do is really to say, all right, then you can give me a constraint T, a runtime constraint T, and if I know that I can enforce a certain distribution shape on the individual latencies, then what I'm really able to do is enforce a certain shape on the overall end-to-end execution time of the full application doing millions of those transactions, okay? So what we're able to do is really force the shape of this distribution to stay just a little bit over this T threshold. And what is that little bit? Well, is this A, which is the level of uncertainty, the level of paranoia, right, that we feel comfortable with. So set that to 0 and you get a strict guarantee. All right, so with this in mind, again, I just give you the intuition that methods that use data and then manage the system by leveraging that knowledge are very important and indeed very powerful, right? But we don't stop there. we want to use not only profile-driven consolidation, but also at runtime being able to refine that profile information and then continuously understand whether new workload needs to be taken into account when making this decision and when refining the information we have for our applications. So where does it lead to? Well, it turns out, again, I work on this problem for a while, and what we quickly realized is that software management, so changing just the OS, changing just the hypervisor, really has a lot of downsides, right? For example, apart from doing partitioning, it's hard to do things dynamically. It's going to come with a lot of overhead and also engineering costs. Observing things, profiling, sometimes is equal to impacting the timing of the system, because now you're adding workload into the system, which is the profiler. And then often you have to settle for a balance, which is something coarse-grained in the end in terms of management. But a lot of researchers, my colleague, propose, okay, well, let's change the hardware entirely, right? We can create new processors, we can create new memory subsystems. But often these are just research prototypes. So it's really hard to know what's going to survive and become informative of future systems. So instead, what my group does is the following. Why don't we leverage reprogrammable hardware? And I don't mean, why don't we just write our processors in reprogrammable hardware? I mean, leverage the fact that now our systems are becoming mixed domain, where you have CPUs, GPUs, these are traditional computing engines, but also memory resources that are heterogeneous, as I said before. But importantly, all of this is surrounded by a programmable fabric. This is literally hardware that we can redefine at runtime, right? And there are commercial examples of platforms that we actually work on in our research. Everything that I mentioned in my presentation, these are all implemented on real systems. This is how we roll, right? So we're talking about ThinQ UltraScale Plus, Enzian systems. So what can we do with this? Well, first we have to understand why this platform exists in the first place. Well, because everybody wants more heterogeneity, and what's better than instead of providing random GPUs, accelerators that it's unclear whether they will be useful, they can just give you a box of Legos and tell you, you write your own hardware, the one you need, right? And the question is, okay, this is interesting, but is this just an experiment, or this platform are here to stay for the long haul? Here, I'm gonna just show you a little animation where reflecting on recent news of Altera, the biggest FPGA company, being bought by Intel in 2014, now back in theory independent from Intel, but the other FPGA company being Xilinx, acquired by AMD in a big acquisition in 2022. So yes, now we have the biggest general purpose companies in with ownership of the biggest FPGA producers. So yeah, it's fair to say that these systems are here to stay. So now what we can do is to say, to rethink really the role of data flows are something that just happen to be related to the computation we deploy, and instead be able to observe them at a fundamental level and potentially control really the data exchanges throughout the platform, right? And in fact, my research says, well, why don't we turn data flows into programmable entities, which is really one of the first grants we ever get funded from NSF, and where the rest of the work in my lab stemmed from. So that was the intuition. And in fact, right, we have a few ways where we have demonstrated this becomes possible when you have programmable logic on board, right? For example, here's the typical block design of a 4-core single main memory subsystem, where you also have a programmable logic on the side. And what you can essentially do is reroute transactions instead of going to main memory to go to the PL. And then here you have a little PL module, for example, we call it PLIM, programmable logic in the middle, that is in charge of rerouting transaction to the memory subsystem. So this allows us to also extend our interaction mechanism by going from traditional access in the PL to leveraging coherence language, so the ability of the cache to remain cache coherent. Remember that cache coherent interconnect? And by doing that, we're actually able to bypass a lot of slow paths to send transaction directly to the PL, and really be able to bypass slow buses, be able to snoop, right? Passively listen to memory operation, memory traffic, and also be able to selectively decide when to take charge and start rerouting and managing things at the memory subsystem level. All right, so with this in mind, right, what can we do? So when we start to reroute memory traffic through the PL, we can do a lot of different things. For example, we can manipulate what addresses are being sent around, right? And there's a technique called cache splitting that enables some sort of splitting logic on where things go throughout the platform. We can also play with the exact timing of individual memory transactions and their ordering, for example, coming from a critical task versus a non-critical task. And we called this, we implemented a test case, a proof of concept called the scheme, the scheduler in the middle. We can also play with how the payloads of data are sent around. And we can also really observe, just observe and learn a lot from what the application is trying to do. And so here, I don't have the time to talk about all the other research here, but this is very intuitive, the silent profiler. In the silent profiler case, once again, we have this Caesar, we call it Caesar, monitoring technology, which uses coherence channels to be able to observe requests as they pass through, as they're sent from the course to the memory subsystem. And here we use JLAUS RT to be able to partition things so that we know what we are observing. And then we run an application like tracking. This is an application, a vision application tracking the movement of an object across multiple frames. And here we really can build a heat map of individual transaction as they hit memory. And so at the bottom, we can see which pages are the most hot, the most utilized over time. And at the top, we can reconstruct essentially how much data bandwidth these applications are extracting. And we can do the same with different applications. And we can see that we can kind of appreciate the differences and plan ahead for when we are expecting a phase of heightened activity in memory, which is also informed by where the activity is spatially, which memory controller, for example, which pages specifically in the system are going to be accessed. And we can do this on a real system. And that means that if you think about it, so abstracting things away a little, we are able to construct a spatiotemporal profile of our application, meaning we can reason about activity in memory and construct, right, over time, clusters of activity, so we can plan ahead for making sure that those resources are available. And also over time, we can learn, right, when we expect the application, by the way, this is a real application profile, where we expect the application to require more resources or less, so we can, again, do proactive management. And so I'm going to show you a little cute thing that we can start to be able to do now, which is if you have a task running on a CPU and you know ahead of time what its profile in terms of demand, future demand of resources is, then we can also track where the process is currently at in terms of its progress and really build the equivalent of a progress bar dealing with, communicating to the system, where are we at in terms of progress? This is the equivalent of you using Google Maps to know how long it takes estimated to get to destination given the congestion ahead, right? And when we do that, here's what we can do. We can take an application by itself, and you can see the progress on the y-axis and the time on the x-axis. And this is when it's running alone. When we don't do anything and just observe how its progress degrades, we can see this red line here, which is, it means we're going to have around 2x slowdown in this particular platform. Again, this is implemented on real hardware. So what we are able to do now is say, okay, I want a set point for my execution time, right? I want to constrain the runtime to a certain level, and this is the set point line in the middle. And then when we execute our application with our management strategies, the real progress is this blue line, where we show that there are management points, those little dots, and then in the end, we are able to meet our specification, our constraint. Now, where does it go from here? So in my research, this is probably the slide that gives you in one figure all that we're trying to do. We want to go from legacy systems where we have black boxes everywhere. The software is black box, the hardware is black box, into knowledge-driven system. Knowledge, I really mean knowledge of what the application wants to do and how the hardware behaves. And so in a way, we are lowering this barrier of observability and programmability to start to be able to reason about the behavior of the complex hardware underneath. And for example, we're able to leverage trace extraction. We're able to tap into the huge amount of information that comes from Snoop analysis at the coherence level. We're also be able to extract periodic performance sampling. And then at the level of application, we can enrich the way we think about application are just beyond the binary and also including a lot of information of what the application is trying to do over time. And then all of this is met with techniques at the OS and hypervisor level where we are able to extract that knowledge, but also act upon that knowledge and inform the system. So send back actuation control commands to the resources underneath to be able to enforce our performance guarantees. All right, with this, I just want to say that my argument is that by using software-shaped platform, meaning platform where we can change the hardware and learn a lot more on the hardware underneath at runtime, we can really go very, very close to have full self-awareness and therefore good time management. So in a last slide of summary, so just what we touched, without proper primitives, multi-more integration, acceleration, accelerator enabled systems are very hard to integrate, and strict software partitioning is needed, but just the first step. And shared resource management primitives must become a commodity now so that we can enact workload profiling methods and drive workload-driven consolidation. But in the end, the end goal has to be dynamic management with fine-grained knowledge of application and hardware behavior. And I think that the new era of CPU plus FPGA platform are incredible tools at our disposal to be able to push new observation and control paradigms. And in my opinion, the perfect playground for knowledge-driven system management. All right, with this, I just want to show the reference very quickly, since this talk is being recorded and you wonder what papers I was mentioning throughout, and then just get to my thank you for your attention, and I'll be super happy to answer any question you may have.
Thank you so much, Professor Mancuso, for such an interesting masterclass session today. It was wonderful to have your expertise on the topic on hand today. Before we move ahead with the questions, Professor Mancuso, we had a quick poll for all the students who had joined us today. Just a second, and the next poll is going live right now. To everyone who is on the call, to all the 178 of you all, what excites you most about studying computer science from the United States? Is it about high quality education and top universities like Boston University CAS, or better job opportunities across the globe after graduation, advanced research and technology access, like how Professor Mancuso explained us just now, or is it international exposure and networking? We would be waiting for more 5 seconds. All right. With that, and we have the poll. So many of you all think that high quality education in top universities, better job opportunities, and advanced research opportunities are the things which excite you most about studying CS in the United States. That's wonderful. Now, for our next presentation, I now invite Mr. Mark Khan to help us dive deeper into the various programs and all the opportunities at Boston University CAS.
Actually, Mohan, if you don't mind, why don't we take some of the questions for Professor, since I realize that those are quite titillating, and I just need about 5 minutes at the end.
Sure. We can start with the questions then. Just a second. Okay. Yes. So Professor Mancuso, a question has come up from Shadab. He's asking if you can share insights on some of the most recent breakthroughs or ongoing research in cyber-physical systems.
That's a very broad question. The beauty of cyber-physical systems as a field is that it's inherently interdisciplinary. And if we talk about breakthrough, well, there are breakthroughs all around, and some of them are at my level, the type of research that we do. For example, at the system level research operating system and hardware. I can mention that, for example, we have a really tight connection with industry. And I think one of the biggest breakthrough that is still in the making, but is really happening, is really a much tighter connection between we community saying we need certain features and the community of, for example, architectural designers like RISC-V coming in and say, oh yeah, we can see how this is important and we're gonna rearrange, redesign the way the inner working of the CPU works to be able to address these fundamental challenges. This one has not happened anywhere in the past where Intel would push out a CPU and you got to deal with that. Same for ARM. And now instead the community is coming together and realizing that no, actually we can co-design things. That to me is huge. The second thing, and I believe, and now this is again my area, but don't forget that my colleagues, for example, work at the level of control theory, right? And so a lot of the newer breakthroughs are actually in the world of how do we control these damn complex systems, right? So we are moving a little bit away from traditional control theory. This is, I consider, a huge breakthrough because control theory in the traditional way, it breaks down at some point. It's unable to handle really complex systems. And we are marrying that research with, for example, reinforcement learning. So now when the two come together, what you're able to do is not only have the nice assurances of traditional control theory, but also be able to scale up and quickly learn how to control new systems. By the way, we are also active in that area, in that domain. I could have my PhD give you a talk about it. That to me is very exciting because it just lowered the barrier for building systems that are inexpensively controllable, but also safe.
Thank you for that, Professor Mancuso. Professor Vidhi is asking if someone has a non-CS background but wants to transition into CPS, would BU's MS programs be a good fit? What kind of foundational knowledge should they develop beforehand?
Sounds good. This is a very good question. And the answer is a bit complex in a sense that there are many angles at which you want to approach cyber-physical systems research. But I'll give you the example of the research that I do. Normally, what we do is I design at least a bit of a track for students to be able, that are interested in systems, to be able to get where they need to be for research. And sometimes that track, depending on your background, could start from actually a 300-level course. I offer architecture course. I'm actually teaching architecture right now. I teach system evaluation courses that are really forming that core set of knowledge on terminology metrics that are needed to build upon. And then I also teach, for example, an embedded system class where I teach you all the challenges that are involved in crossing the boundaries between a physical system that works in the continuous domain into the digital world that talks in bits, right? So what are those challenges with sensing, actuation, notional stability, and how do we actually do it hands-on? It's a lab-based course. You actually get to program microcontrollers. There's a balancing system where you need to keep a ball in the center following a certain path and do it in a timely way. So that one to me is at least understanding that certain concepts have been delivered. But typically what happens next is you're always allowed to do a directed study. And typically what happens at that point, if I notice that you are very interested, particularly promising, then we arrange a directed study. We work on a concrete project that typically is publishable, at least in a workshop. And then after that, in my opinion, you're ready for research. Typically what we do at that point is we support you broadly to be able to go either out into the world if you want to go to an internship or a PhD, or stay around and work with us on research level works.
Thank you for that, Professor Mancuso. Professor, we have a question which has come up. CPS is being integrated into critical sectors like healthcare, autonomous vehicles, as you mentioned about Tesla cars, etc., and industrial automation. What are some of the biggest challenges in ensuring the reliability as well as the safety and security of data as well?
Ooh, okay, so that's a lot of challenges. All right, so I'm gonna be biased, and I think that the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges that you don't hear in the news is really this ability to keep temporal properties in check, especially as our different business units start to integrate new workload. As the shareholder X says, oh, okay, you know what, we should add vision on this platform. That is really threatening your ability to run things on time. And this is what I mean by we need to be able to systematically have techniques for time-preserving integration. That's number one, but that's just one of the challenges that I'm most close to, and that's why I'm biased in thinking that's very important. I believe the second set of challenges when you talk about security is really that these systems are incredibly complex. I'm talking about hardware, software that is millions of lines of code, if not billions of lines of code. And what happens is that there is no one person that truly understands everything that is ongoing in these systems, right? You have engineers that maybe work on that particular hardware subsystem, but there's not even one engineer that can understand the entirety of the hardware. So these days, for example, some of our research, I told you why we are very connected with security. Some of our research explored that in some platforms, you can embed Trojans in the hardware, and there's no way that any software can catch them. You can really play hide and seek at the level of individual memory transactions. That's huge. So we need to address those at the design level of our systems. But that's a huge challenge, the fact that in this sea of complexity, a little bug can really compromise what we call CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our systems, the triad, the security triad. And we have actually some research results that show just that. And then there is the control aspect, right? So I said timeliness, security, but there is a huge pillar of safety. Safety is really, really hard to prove in a theoretically founded way on all systems, especially when the systems become extremely complex. So a lot of my colleagues, what they are looking into is how can we have systems where the controller can be simpler but verified, and then have a more complex controller that is really able to handle the full complexity and the advantages from that complexity in a system. And then when things start to fail, we can detect it and roll back to the so-called safety controller. This research is very much in flux. I'm going to mention something that, for example, my colleagues in UIUC were working on, which is the simplest architecture. This complex controller, backup controller that play this dance on who's in charge. But nowadays, what's actually happening is really leverage very interesting result from the ML community, reinforcement learning and ML, and really design proofs that are stability proofs for systems that are otherwise very complex to analyze by hand. And this is sort of the line of work of Lyapunov control theory, but in the machine learning world. So how do you get ML to design proofs for the stability of your system when the system is very complex? All of these are just some examples of sort of what I believe are the key challenges, but also how researchers around the world, including the people at BU, are really hacking away bit by bit at these huge challenges.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Mancuso. Professor, one last question before we close with the questions related to the topic over here. Tanish is asking us, is it important to have interdisciplinary knowledge along with knowing CS? Should we be equipped more with electrical engineering or electronics engineering while working with CPS-related fields?
Very good question, too. And again, you're asking a very biased person, because I do think that there is especially these days, it's very hard to accomplish breakthroughs if you have a bit of tunnel vision, meaning that if you are only expert into one thing, nowadays it just gets very, very hard to really see the big picture, zoom out, and tackle problems that are relevant when those problems arise from a meeting of multiple worlds, the physical domain and the cyber domain, right? So I really think this interdisciplinarity is extremely important. And in fact, I usually foster my students in kind of looking behind looking beyond their, their hedge, right? And into understanding really that, hey, some solution can actually come from programming languages world, others from architecture, and others from operating system level design. Understanding how the electronics of a memory controller surprisingly can actually change the way we design the entire stack of an autonomous vehicle. So I absolutely think that interdisciplinarity is super important. Starting in cyber physical systems, starting with a background on electronics definitely help. But being able to broaden your horizon and really learn from the bits, from the transistor level to the algorithmic level complexity, including operating system platforms within that journey, that to me is really what can make a difference in CPS.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Mancuso. Thank you so much for answering all the questions posted by the students. It was wonderful having you with us today. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Over to you, Mark.
Excellent. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Great. So Boston University, for those of you who don't know, is one of the largest schools in the US and certainly one of the larger private schools. This is a fun picture because it shows Professor Mancuso's office in the nice shiny building and mine in the more antiquated building. But this is a picture of our campus. And what you can tell is there's a lot of community, a lot of collaboration, as Moin mentioned as well.
I think we lost your audio.
Let's try that again.
Yeah, it's better now.
I needed 5 minutes, not 5 seconds. So let's, there we go. So some of the available resources at a place like BU, because of our size, we support a lot of students and we have a lot of different things that are available to you. There are hundreds of labs. There are many opportunities to dive into research. And there's a lot of cutting edge technology that's available to graduate students, not just PhD students, which I think is fascinating as well. Our master's students are actively engaged in labs, in research, but they're also taking classes with our very talented faculty. I've briefly listed some of the programs that we have to offer, but in the computer science realm, there is artificial intelligence, there is data-centric computing, there's cybersecurity, and traditional computer science as well. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we have an amazing engineering school and there are wonderful opportunities to dive in there too. So a little bit about the facilities that we have to offer, but more importantly, for some of the questions that you guys have been asking, our final deadline is March 15th. We will review applications after that deadline on a space available basis. There is scholarship available out, so even if you applied early or later, if we have dollars, we will certainly give those away. Minimally, we have 10 seed scholarships available, but our scholarships do range up to 50%, and anyone who is qualified for a scholarship will receive one. You're automatically considered once you're admitted. I have my email address here for those of you who have questions. In terms of the application fee waiver, Moin will send a link, but you can just use that link to say that you attended today's session and send a screenshot of your email saying that you were here, and we will give you an application fee waiver. So are there any other questions, Moin, we breezed through?
Yes. Thank you so much for your presentation, Mark. Mark, there has been quite a lot of questions related to different programs which have come up. Sujit is asking is that what career support services are provided for international students at Boston University CAS?
Great question. It's very intense. So career services at BU come in many different iterations. There's a center, and the department also hosts things. There are STEM-focused fairs and career fairs and job interviews right on campus. So there's a lot, and we treat our international students like our domestics. We don't see a difference, so to speak. So talent will be recognized. You can do everything from resume critiquing, cover letter workshops, mock interviews. We have VMock, we have Handshake. You can see who's visiting campus. So there are many opportunities. I know it's always scary with the job market. You never know what's going on, but I think our folks are keeping on top of everything that's going on. And because of the large network at BU, our students are also plugged in through our alumni.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. Mark, there have been a couple of questions which have come in as to is GRE required, etc., for pursuing a graduate program at Boston CAS. If you can help all the students who have come in today with how does the exact holistic review process of an application goes to at BU? That
Yeah, I know this can be very confounding, especially for computer scientists. Yes, there is no rubric. There is no, you've earned this and you've gotten points here. The holistic review process is basically meant to determine, will a student succeed in the program? Can they do the work? Will they step up when the classes become a little bit more challenging than what they've been accustomed to? Will they be able to pull off the assignments that faculty members are going to ask them to do? So when we're looking at applications, GREs are not required. However, if a student would like to submit those, more focus is placed on the quant ability than on the English ability, just because of the nature of the subject. That is also indicative of a talent, right? And we're looking for, well, will this student thrive? Well, you have your letters of recommendation from faculty members like Professor who will say, this was one of my best students. She's talented. She asks great questions in class. She has a curious mind. But you also have the ability to tell us your story, your narrative, and your personal statement. Why do you want to study this? Where do you see yourself going in this field? What are the contributions you're hoping to make? Additionally, we will look at all of the grades that you've acquired over 3 or 4 years. We do accept 3-year degrees for those of you who had asked that question, but we're looking at the specifics. It's not just your CGPA. At the trends, have you been improving? Did you have a rocky start? Or have you always been talented and maintained very high grades? All of those things then, when put together, create as a student and essentially will let us know whether or not you're going to be successful. So that's what we gauge our applications on, not just the numbers.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. Mark, one last question before we close the session for today. Many a time students want to know how is the student life in Boston and Massachusetts before deciding a particular university, if you can throw some light on that as well.
Yeah, and I invite Professor to mention this as well, because you're dealing with students too. But I love Boston. That's one of the reasons why I went to Boston as a student, even though I came from a large bustling city. I wanted that experience because Boston's just known for its academic prowess. And I had friends that were joining me at other universities in the Boston area. There are about 50 colleges in the greater Boston region. So it's definitely an academic powerhouse, but the social scene, it's not New York, that's where I grew up. However, it's getting closer to what you would expect from a larger metropolitan city. So many things to do. Everything is within walking distance with the campus. That's one of the things that I think our students really enjoy. If you are going to a concert or a baseball game or a brewery, all of those things are a 5-minute walk. So you really can be plugged into a community. There are also amazingly diverse neighborhoods. You will find cuisines of different, even last night I was in the office and I ordered Greek food to be delivered. So you will find whatever you're looking for. And if you don't, someone will know and someone will help you navigate that. But feel free to back me up on that.
I'm gonna add 2 things. The first one is there is just no place like Boston in the entire United States. Just a place with so many universities. It's just unheard of anywhere else. This is the concentration of talent and smart people is insane in this city. And that really raises the level of the conversation, right? And the community and the networking you will form. Second, Boston is fantastic, but you know what's even better in terms of things to do? The whole New England. There's so many little towns that are just dense with little towns to visit all around Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, in just insanely beautiful scenery from, you know, the coast to the mountains. So yeah, that's another place, the reason why I love this place.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Mancuso. Thank you so much, Mark, for answering all the student questions. It was wonderful having you with us, and it was a pleasure hosting you. And to everyone, to all the students who have joined in, the scholarship deadline for the round 4 for Boston University College of Arts and Sciences scholarships is 15th of March, which is 2 days away. Last 2 days left for you to apply for these scholarships. There are 10 awards worth up to 10,000 US dollars. The details have been put up in the chat. Alternatively, you can log on to the SEED website and apply for the same as well. All the details regarding application fee waivers, program details at BUCAS would be shared with everyone over an email. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
think-
Thank you for hosting, and yeah, great session, Renato. Loved it.
Thank you for having me. It was a honor, and to all the students online, I hope to see you in my class.
Awesome.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye all.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.